It's also so that during the crisis, the cooperative banking model has proven to be more resilient. That does not mean that we didn't have in some countries also problems, particularly also, I would say, in countries where the economy was severely under pressure and also the real economy gets under pressure. That will have its impact on cooperative banks as well. That cannot be denying. But in most EU countries, cooperative banks have been weathered this crisis very well. They had due to their business model, they had relatively few, if at all, any toxic assets. Also, the cooperative business model, with focusing on local economy, also drove the business even in these big difficult times. The risk management is normally relatively conservative for cooperative banks, or risk averse, I would say. And cooperative banks hold the loans they have on their balance sheet, so they don't securitize. So they have also were not generating any toxic assets. This being said, of course, so that is, as I said, that some of our members, of course, in economies that are severely under pressure also need to recapitalize. It's therefore particularly a shame that in some countries, like in these nice, beautiful countries, cooperative banks are not considered for recapitalization by EU measures. It's in a way, unbelievable. Because, as you can see, the supply of capital has normally comes from the members. The cooperative doesn't have access to the capital market, so it has to be gets it from members by member shares. That makes the creation of a cooperative rather a burdensome exercise, because I mean, if you collect from individual citizens shares or member capital, that's quite burdensome. In the EU, the normal minimum capital to create a bank is 5 million euros. So you can calculate how many people, if you have 50,000 people, and everybody gives 100 euros, then you make it. But I mean, to get 50,000 people for such an initiative is not easy. So creating cooperative banks today is also not easy. And cooperative banks have to finance their growth mainly via retained earnings. Because you cannot generate capital that may give later on, a high, may increase in value very much. The cooperative shares normally remain stable over the time. You get a dividend, but that may be attractive, but that may not be for any investors be particularly interesting. The dividends are typically conservative. That is not, you won't become rich as a member of a cooperative. At the same time, when the cooperative is doing well, it will over the time accumulate capital. In countries where you have a long cooperative tradition, the 2/3 of the capital is retained earnings and only a smaller part is member shares. So that's also the good thing, that if the cooperative is only living a certain time, it will always generate some profit, give the biggest part to the retained earnings, and there grow, and therefore increase the potential of the area it's in. Yeah, and traditionally, that was also Stan's point, those where the cooperative systems exist for a long time, cooperatives are traditionally highly capitalized because they have many capital, and they've accumulated that over decades, if not even century. Now, possibly only some short words. I don't want to go about the cooperative structures, because you will ask me how that normally works. You can say that all cooperative groups in the EU follow the same basic model. It starts always with a member ownership at the local level. That gives also this specific approach to banking. But also then the local banks own then central banks, the central cooperative bank, or central service providers, very important. You may need ATM services for payments. You may need data processing centers. You may need insurance, leasing, mortgages. That comes due to the more you develop as a cooperative group. And then you have, and I will come to that now with a short addressing different situation, different countries. You may then have different degrees of autonomy of the local bank and different degree of the powers of the central institution. You may then say at a certain moment, well, nevertheless, we have to centralize certain things and, give to be more efficient, because after all, cooperative banks are also competing in the market. It's nice to have a cooperative bank, but you always have to offer services that are of excellent quality so that they can pass. And of course, you have to offer them at prices that are, of course, at least the same, if not even lower than those of others. That is what our members expect from us. So, I have here one of the highly integrated groups is Rabobank. You have their 10 million clients. Not all of them are members. 139 local banks. Above it, you have Rabobank Netherlands with different specialized tasks. I will not go into the detail. I could, but end up there. What's important also about Rabobank is that Rabobank has a cross-guarantee scheme. That means the different banks are all tied economically together, which makes the institution also highly more efficient, particularly when it comes to the allocation of capital, and also more centralized. Then you have the system of Crédit Agricole. To give another example, they have the 2,500 caisses locales, who, however, more exist as some political entities, because the banking business is only done on the regional level, where you have the 39 caisses régionales that finally hold the biggest part of Crédit Agricole SA, the listed joint stock company, which at the same time is also fulfilling central tasks and supervising the caisses régionales. Then you have, let's say, the German cooperative group, where that is more decentralized with 17 million members, 1,120 local banks that own then the two central banks. The central banks are providing liquidity and strategy, and you have then different, under the roof of the central banks, different specialized service providers, insurance, consumer credit, leasing, not to forget data processing centers. Here, however, the local banks remain fully autonomous. So the central bank is owned by the local banks, but if a local bank decides, is fully independent regarding its business policy. And about the same structure in Austria, where you have a three-tiered structure, where you have local banks, regional banks, and then the central institution. But you can see always at the heart, always at the start, is a local bank as a local initiative. And over the years, I'm talking here about organizations that were created mostly in the 19th century, that have more than 150 years of tradition. And as you will hear, certainly from the Greek cooperative banks, the cooperative banking in Greece is a much more recent phenomenon. I would be now, that is the EACB, but I don't want to go into detail anymore. I would be at the end of my presentation if you have any more questions, or possibly you have them in the end. Thank you very much for your attention.